My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. Every year in November, Florida State University hosts a massive event in Orlando, Florida. For business students, this is a sales role play and case competition, an opportunity to compete and get exposed to job opportunities with some of the world's best sales organizations. For companies, this is an unbelievable recruitment opportunity, bringing several hundred of the nation's best students, all already interested in starting their careers in sales, into one location for you to meet. So if you're a student looking to differentiate yourself and secure your dream job in sales, a marketing or sales professor looking to show off your students and connect them with great opportunities, or a sales manager or recruiter looking to acquire top sales talent, come learn more about the International Collegiate Sales Competition at www.icsc-fsu.com. That's www.icsc-fsu.com. Oh my gosh, I am so behind in releasing episodes. My apologies, everybody. The good news is I've got a lot of interviews queued up, a lot of things I need to push out. Today's episode, I'm pretty excited about. We've got Scott Miller. He is the EVP at Franklin Covey. If you don't know what Franklin Covey is, you're probably not thinking very hard. They have some of the most famous business books of the last several decades, kind of required reading for anybody in business or communication or anything like that. I've titled this episode, More is Not Better. Better is better. This is something that Scott said that comes to my mind at least a couple times a day. We talk about a lot of other things as well, but I'm going to leave you to discover those yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you get something out of it. I will maybe start with an observation, which is there's almost these generational books that are put out. And for people who are maybe 20 years older than you and I, the fundamental business book that you had to be familiar with was probably, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Sure. To the point where at a certain time, if you were talking to somebody of a certain age and they brought that book up and you didn't know what it was, they would immediately think that maybe you didn't know what you're talking about, right? You didn't have a firm grounding in business thought, in business philosophy. Obviously, for the last many years, probably the last few decades, one of those books has been The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is, your company is behind. And it really, truly is something where, somebody who's 50 years old talking to a young new salesperson or a new employee and brings up the 7 habits, if that young person doesn't know what that means, they're immediately judged. Something's missing in their brain, right? If they don't know this, it's so fundamental. And it's very interesting to me that you could be in a company that has put a book out like that, that's so fundamental, but then obviously the company continues to evolve. Looking at what you do, and you've authored a number of books about leadership and different topics. So one thing that really was kind of intriguing to me is how do you exist in a company that's so well connected in people's minds with this one book? I mean, how do you branch out from that? How do you extend from that and try to continue to engage people?
Well, I think our firm has always tried not to be guru-centric, right? Not to make everything about Dr. Covey or everything about our other co-founder, Hiram Smith, who was a very prolific author and the inventor of the original Franklin Planner, the Franklin planning process. So we've always deliberately not wanted to be based on the brand of one person. So although the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which has sold, 40 million copies in 30 years, that's a core part of our business. It's about really life skills. We have lots of derivatives. We have, 10 best-selling books, whether it be the 4 Disciplines of Execution or the Speed of Trust or the 5 Choices of Productivity or the books that I've helped co-author, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. So I think for us, it was like that. It was not being tied to one person, one personality, so that when Dr. Covey did pass 9 years ago, when Hiram Smith did pass just almost exactly a year ago, the company didn't only just survive, it thrived. It was a very deliberate process to build a brand broader than based on person or personality.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So if I am a younger career professional and I'm not familiar with very many of the works coming out of Franklin Covey, where should I start? What's the first thing, and then maybe the second and third thing I should read?
Well, I think to your point earlier, I think we're both best well known for the unprecedented success that Dr. Covey had in writing this book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it really is not Dr. Covey's invention of these 7 habits that made it so successful. He didn't invent these habits.
Mm.
He studied them, he researched them, he curated them, he organized them, he named them, he sequenced them. And he really completed a multi-century review of all of the success literature back before the internet that made people successful. And he found that there were 7 common things that highly effective, highly successful people had in common. And they were these 7 habits. And so Dr. Covey named the book very intentionally, the 7 habits of highly effective people, not highly efficient people, not highly successful people. So I would say start there, is that this is a book that will transform your knowledge around how to be a better, more collaborative person, how to set a vision for yourself, how to prioritize, how to collaborate, how to have life balance, how to take responsibility for your own actions. And it will absolutely improve your ability to be a better student, friend, daughter, parent, colleague, leader, entrepreneur, every aspect of your life. I'd say start with mastering the 7 habits, or at least mastering the knowledge of them, and trying to align your paradigms, your mindsets, and your daily behaviors around them.
Yeah. And then where should I go after that?
I think it depends on your role, right? I mean, Franklin Covey is mainly an organizational performance improvement company. So our mission, although, is to really inspire greatness in people and organizations everywhere. Most of our work is done through organizations. We have very little individual work going on with individual consumers, although we sell, millions of books a year and we have open enrollment programs. I would say it depends on your role, right? If you're in an organization and you're looking at building execution capability, meaning you've got great ideas and you've got great goals, but you're just trying to transfer those into change in human behavior, it might be best to have you or your team look at our 4 disciplines of execution solution. If you're a leader and you're trying to build a high trust culture, you're trying to really understand how do you become a trusted leader. Our speed of trust solution is the best in the world. We teach what are the 13 behaviors common to all high trusted leaders. If your challenge is focus and time management, productivity, we have solutions on that. So I think the website is the best resource to understand, what is your challenge, and then which solution might be best aligned to meet that need.
Good. And you mentioned that, Dr. Covey really did this, I like the way you phrased it, a multi-century review of what makes people effective. And I guess that makes sense as to, it helps explain why these habits are so timeless. Do you think they equally apply today as they did, several years ago when Covey first wrote the book?
I think they're exponentially greater. And that may sound cliche-ish or like marketing speak, but I think if you look at the change that's happening in our world, including, in the pandemic we're in, and the uncertainty and the devastation, the carnage that's happening on businesses, on our economic stability, stress that's happening in our interpersonal lives, we need to keep our children healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally. I think the 7 habits are more relevant today than they were yesterday. And that's not, like I said, it's not meant to be trite. I mean, think about it. Habit 1, be proactive. When most people hear that, they think, okay, be proactive, take initiative, take charge, take control. Well, that is also true. But in the book, what Dr. Covey really means is that when you are proactive, what you are not is reactive, meaning you don't give up your, quote, emotional weather. You don't give up your wellness to other people, other situations, other circumstances. That proactive people carry with them their own weather, and that they're very clear on what their goals are, their values, their purpose, their mission, their legacy. And they don't let all of these things coming at us, other people's moods, circumstances, unmet expectations, unfulfilled promises, that they don't rock your world, that you are bracing for and you're prepared for lots of different waves to come crashing on your beach. That proactive people put space in the stimulus, what's coming at you, in your response. And they choose their response very carefully. They just don't fly off the handle. They're not easily lured into other people's emotional traps. And I think that's really the essence right now of what makes people so effective or ineffective, is that, every day I have promises that are being broken, things that I thought were going to happen that didn't happen, things that are canceled, expectations that aren't being met, income that's not being realized, clients that are canceling opportunities. And so if I'm a proactive person, no one can impact my emotional well-being except for myself, based on my values and what I do and don't choose to get upset about. Says easy, does hard, but I think right there is a perfect example of how the 7 habits are enormously relevant in the midst of this unspeakable carnage coming to us from this pandemic.
Yeah, well, even something as seemingly straightforward as begin with the end in mind is a little tricky when all sorts of things are interrupting the journey from start to finish. That, okay, well, maybe I thought I was working hard for a vacation, but now I can't travel. So what am I doing now, right? Maybe I intended to try to go for this promotion, but the company is at a freeze, trying to figure out how to adapt and move forward, and I'm just sort of stuck. So yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. And I don't think it's marketing speak.
Sorry, can I build on that thought for a second?
Please, yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the big ideas that you're touching on, even begin with the end in mind, was an idea that Dr. Covey, again, did not invent, that he popularized, which is this idea of your paradigm shift, right? We know it as your belief system, Willy, your mindset. We know it as the way in which you see the world, you see yourself, you see people of other religions and faiths and sexual orientations and industries. Highly effective people are constantly challenging their own paradigm about what they think should be right, what they think is true, the way they think it should be. They also are very introspective on their own mindsets, that they're emotionally agile, they're mentally nimble. It doesn't mean that you're Gumby or that you're flexible or nimble with your morals or your ethics. It's just you recognize that there may be a better way, there may be a different way. Things are going to change, and the most effective people, and not just survive, but thrive in this economic uncertainty, are going to be those that are the most agile in every aspect of what's coming their way. How do you respond on a dime without it cratering you, without it crushing you mentally, without it depressing you, without it hijacking your plans? Some of the best laid plans are those that are actually have been interrupted. I love this concept from a friend of mine that says sometimes a disappointment is an appointment. I kind of repeat that to my mantra every day, because I have things that, I was promised and that now they're changing. And okay, so what's the silver lining in that? Yeah, that's disappointing. Yeah, I lost some money. I lost some fame or prestige. But okay, so what is that going to now enable me to do that otherwise I wouldn't have done? And I think that's just a great mindset and great paradigm to enter every day. Curveballs are going to come my way. Nothing is going to be as I expected. And when it does, I'll be delightfully surprised and pleased. But I'm not just bracing for, I'm kind of expecting things to be different. And how am I going to navigate around that? Those are really some great behaviors that we all can learn that come from a mindset. I think is one of the gifts that Dr. Covey gave us in his book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we use quite a bit of the concepts and portions of the text at various stages with our sales students, and I'm sure a lot of other sales programs do as well. I mean, the students and teams will read and do presentations on the 7 habits. We'll go over the time management matrix stuff. Got other teams of students that'll go through principle-centered leadership. This is part of a sales management curriculum, and I sort of tell them, okay, before we start telling you about how you should be bossing other people around, let's take a couple of weeks here on the front end to talk about how we should be managing ourselves, right? That the first task of the leader is to lead yourself. And we go through these materials. I mean, the time management matrix, I love going through that because it's sort of like I need to remind myself every semester, where are my priorities? How do I make these trade-offs? And one thing we talk a lot about in this sales management class is that leadership kind of across functional areas, whether you're leading a government or a company or a team or whatever, involves making decisions that require trade-offs. And I find young people certainly, and maybe this carries on as they grow older, but they're very uncomfortable with the idea of trade-offs. And yet it's fundamental to leadership. I mean, you have to make decisions that are going to delight some people and not delight other people. You have to decide that one meeting is important and urgent, and another meeting is, not that important, but somebody's trying to make it urgent for you. And you just make the decision to say, no, I can't take this meeting right now. Obviously, that person's going to be, a little displeased with that choice. What do you make of that? Why do we hate making trade-offs so much?
I think it comes down to this principle that there will always be more good ideas than there is capacity to execute them. And I think the most successful leaders in the world, of which many I have met or worked for or worked with or interviewed or written about, what they have in common, really, as is they're willing to say no. They're willing to say no to the good that might come at the expense of the great. They're willing to risk offending someone by saying, that's a great idea, but we're not going to do that because we haven't yet fulfilled what we've already committed to do. So it takes stamina. It takes wherewithal. It takes courage, even in your own life as a student or as a leader or an employee, to resist the temptation of what's next, what's big, what's shiny. I think it was Tim Cook, of course, the famed now CEO of Apple, that will tell you you could fit all of Apple's products on one dining room table because they say no to good ideas all day long. As I look at my own brand, I got way too much going on, right? I host what is now the world's largest subscribed to weekly podcast. I'm writing 4 books. I'm an officer in a company. I'm a dad of 3 boys. I'm a husband. I'm a host on bookclub.com. I write an article for Inc. magazine. I've got a TV program being pitched. I got more, but I mean, it's insane. And I think as I look at why I'm doing all that, well, I probably crave the validation. I like to be liked. I like to not disappoint people who ask for help. And as a result of that, I would argue that, some of my work, quite frankly, is B quality. And if I said no to 2 or 3 more things, or someone says no for me, it allows me to marshal yet demonstrated discipline around the idea of less is better. More is not better. Better is better in almost every circumstance other than pizza. More is not better. That's a good principle for everyone to be thoughtful about. Your reputation is merely the collection of all the decisions you make in life and how you deliver on promises that you've made. So that's a great insight you bring about around making sure that you're not spreading yourself too thin. And you can differentiate between what is urgent and what is important and what is going to bring significant value. As a marketer, this idea from Seth Godin, you can't boil the ocean, right? Is who is your smallest viable market? Who are the fewest number of people that need to buy your product, read your book, listen to your podcast, shop at your store? And how can you absolutely delight them so they go back and evangelize the next 3 people and the next 3 people? It's counterintuitive. It's frustrating sometimes, but I think it's a well-proven lesson from the most successful people in the world. Beyonce does not do 10 things. She does 3 things or 2 things really well. Madonna.
Well, this is kind of a classic branding lesson in a sense, right? I mean, the good brands, the strongest brands are those that bring to mind that one specific thing that they do especially well. If you think about like the Al Reese perspective, positioning, the battle for your mind, that sort of concept. And the same is true for people, right? You can't be that good, right? I mean, Michael Jordan going to play baseball instead of basketball, stay in your niche, right? Stay in your target. So then how can I make those decisions? And how do I know something is good but not best?
I think it also depends on what your passions are, what are your unique strengths. I've learned so much in my 25 years at the company and interviewing like you, all these amazing authors and thought leaders and business titans on the On Leadership podcast that I host. I think I've learned a couple of things that I'll share with your guest. One is this idea of differentiating between what is urgent and what is important is profound. I think a lot of leaders like me have an urgency addiction. I love a good crisis, really. In fact, I do my best work under pressure and under crisis. And in fact, if a crisis doesn't exist, I'm known to cook one up because I like the dopamine. I like the adrenaline that comes from working in urgency mode. As a leader, I fatigue a lot of people. So I have to be really deliberate. Is this urgent or is this important or is it both? And how do I define important? In the short term, in the long term, to quote you, begin with the end in mind. Is this paying my mortgage this month, or is this allowing me to hire someone next month? Am I looking for this month's sales or next year's sales? Too often, these public companies, of which Franklin Covey is one, become fixated, enslaved even to our investors, to the Wall Street analysts that are looking at short-term revenue. Tim Cook does not give a crap about next month's revenue. I just read a book by David Rubenstein, who, by the way, I'm actually interviewing today. He wrote last week's #1 Wall Street Journal bestselling book called How to Lead. And he interviewed Tim Cook, the famed now CEO that took Apple to the first $1 trillion valuated company in history. And David Rubenstein was rattling off all of these financial measures about Apple's performance. And Tim Cook said, to tell you the truth, I didn't know any of those. He said, we're in it for the long term, right? We sold 1 billion iPhones, most successful product in mankind. Tim Cook is not focused on the short term. I think you find these phenomenal leaders at any level of an organization. They're able to differentiate between short-term wins and long-term wins, and sometimes you need both to keep the lights on. They're able to differentiate between urgent and important, and I also think they're very self-aware about their own strengths. They've taken the time to really know who they are. They ask people, what is it like to work for me? What's it like to be married to me? What's it like to work on a project with me? What's it like to take a vacation with me? And they become really hyper attuned to what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. And then they become really vulnerable and they surround themselves with people who are complementing their strengths and complementing their weaknesses. And they take great pride, and they're proud to be working with people who are functionally smarter than they are in their own specific areas. They're not trying to be the genius in the room. They want to be the genius maker of others. There's some serious wisdom there. I'll share one last thought on that. I was able to interview a gentleman who wrote a book called Range. His name is David Epstein, one of the best leadership books I've ever read. And David Epstein kind of debunks some of Malcolm Gladwell's writings around, the 10,000 hours of being an expert. I think it was Jeff Colvin from Fortune that originally popularized that idea of 10,000 hours. And what David Epstein writes is that, you're either a generalist or you're a specialist. And that really hit me strong about a year ago, because I think a lot of people coming out of college are specialists, right? My brother, the chemical engineer, my friend Craig, who's the anesthesiologist, lawyers, patent attorneys, commercial airline pilots. These are all specialists. They kind of know exactly what they're going to do, and they do it for the rest of their life. I don't know many anesthesiologists that become realtors. I don't know many commercial airline pilots that become hairdressers. And a lot of us that are generalists are very insecure and threatened by these people in our 20s and in our 30s, because we see them paying off their school loans, and they're very confident, they're very clear, and they're making bank. Meanwhile, people like me, when you ask, what did I do? I'm in sales, or I'm a project manager, or I'm in marketing, or I'm a blogger, or I'm an author, I'm an interviewer. I don't know what I do. But I think for the generalist, what you're doing in your 20s and your 30s, even in your 40s, is you're assimilating these wide range of skills. You're a spanning leader. You're not a functionally expert leader. You're a spanning leader. And now, here I am in my early 50s. I know exactly who I am. I am all those things, but it's because I spent my 20s and 30s kind of wrestling, bouncing around somewhat deliberately, maybe somewhat accidentally, a broad variety of things. And now I'm well positioned to be a CEO of any company I wanted to be. I'm not going to do that, but I think that's an important awareness for people to realize. Are you a specialist and are you a generalist? And which of those are working for you? And do you move from one to another? But where are those taking you? I think that's some good career advice.
Well, and your comments about the timing of things are very well received. I mean, I'm constantly confused by the things that public companies do sometimes, and this idea that business schools and MBA programs, we really want to preach about strategy. We really want to produce these executives that are strategically minded and all, which involves a lot of the things that Franklin Covey promotes. You need to begin with the end in mind. You need to be thinking win-win. You need to be forecasting these things in the future. And then they go and work for a company that doesn't care about any of that stuff, right? And a good part, probably about 40% of my research is on longitudinal analysis of newly hired salespeople's performance. And to see that a lot of companies can hire a certain type of salesperson because they have a certain profile of personality traits and dispositions, and they're right. Those are good dispositions for the salesperson to have. They do drive performance, but they don't drive performance in months 1, 2, 3. They don't even really drive performance through that first year. Some of these things come up around the, year and a half mark. They start to really drive exponential performance. But the fact is, we did another study, asked a lot of sales managers how long they wait from making that hiring decision to sort of looking back at that and deciding whether that was a good or a bad decision, or kind of, whether to keep the salesperson or not. And they tend to make those decisions in about 9 to 11 months. Okay, so you're making the decision on whether the person should stay or whether they were a good hire at almost the exact wrong time, when they are the lowest of their performance compared to their other peers when they were hired. If they would just be patient and, if they made the decision for good strategic reasons, then you have to give it a chance to work. And so many people, probably because of that urgency addiction, they just want to change things. If it didn't work this quarter, change something and try again. And then at least you can tell your boss that you changed something to try to do better, when in fact, sometimes not changing things is the only hope you're going to have for any type of long-term effectiveness.
So well said. That's enormous wisdom you just brought there.
Well, I'm not going to do better than that. We should call it a day then. No. Well, then let's talk a little bit about some of the newer Franklin Covey offerings, because, in pulling up the website and looking at your LinkedIn, there's a ton of books out. Some of them you've written. Why would I turn to some of these other books? What specific issues might they help me resolve?
Franklin Covey's got just an enormous pipeline of great books coming out. I'm so honored you asked that, Willie. So our next big book is called The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. This is a book we've been writing for 2 years in the midst of, all of the social injustice debates and rallies and protests and riots and such. We're launching a book in October, or actually November, I think it is 10th, called The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. And it really is just based on the premise that, to be human is to have bias. And not all bias is a bad thing. Our biases tend to be our intellectual shortcuts, often subconscious, unconscious, and that as leaders, as citizens, as team members, we should be more aware of our biases, confirmation biases, and our unconscious biases around business processes, race. A great book coming out. The CEO of AT&T Business, Ann Chow, is a co-author. She joins 2 Franklin Covey colleagues. By the way, Ann Chow sits on our board of directors. It's on Amazon right now. It's a phenomenal book. We have, about 10 years ago, we wrote a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. That book has sold nearly 1 million copies. We've rewritten it and updated it for kind of the next decade. And so that book comes out in March. I'm writing a new book. The first book I wrote was Management Mess to Leadership Success. The second book in that series is Marketing Mess, Brand Success. So as the 8-year chief marketing officer of Franklin Covey, I curated 30 challenges that anybody in marketing faces in their organization to build a brand. So that book, Marketing Mess to Brand Success, will be out in May. We're writing a couple more books in the trust space. We're writing a new book called 4 Essential Roles of Leadership. That book will be out about 1.5 years from now. I also have another book that I'm writing called Master Mentors, 40 Transformative Insights from Our Greatest Minds. So I took 40 of my favorite guests from the first 2 years of our podcast and writing a chapter about each of them. That book comes out next September. Excited about that. So a lot of great things in the pipeline for Franklin Covey.
Why is there always a number attached to the title of the book?
Because it's
not always, but almost always.
Because it's genius. I mean, I remember when I became the chief marketing officer about 10 years ago. I'm actually the first and only ever CMO in the company. And we had some people challenge us about, by the way, not every book, of course, has a number in it, but the numbering system was genius. And therefore we have books that have 3 in them, 4 in them, 5, 6, 7, we have an 8. That's it. But I think any consulting organization would have loved to have locked up the number system many years ago. So kudos to Dr. Covey 30 years ago. Not all books have a number in them, but a number is something people get their hands around. In fact, most books, whether the numbers on the cover, have a number structure, at least.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
For us, we were quite wise. We've debated whether we should continue it. And I think for us, it's generally been a very wise strategy.
Well, I think it also must communicate something about the digestibility of the content, right? If it says, 360 pro tips for closing the deal, and you go, I can't do 360. Yeah. No. 4? Yeah, I can do 4. 7? Yeah, it's like a phone number. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
We're going to stop it right there for now. Please dive into the next episode of the Sales Lab to hear the conclusion of this interview. By the way, if you like what you've heard so far, be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.